There we are. Let me just put that. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is ARIA, the Basics, hosted by the statewide IT Access Initiative, which is under the Maryland Department of Disabilities. My name is Stephen Polacek. I am the IT Accessibility Program Specialist here. I am joined today by Carl. Carl?
Hi, I'm Carl Belanger. I'm a Nonvisual Accessibility Analyst here at the National Federation of the Blind, and happy to join you all today for some talk on ARIA, why you should use it, what the problems are with it, and all that. So happy to have you.
Thanks. So before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. First off, we have captioning available. So if you would like, please use the closed captioning button on your menu ribbon to turn that on. We also have an ASL interpreter with us today. Their feed is spotlighted, so you should have it available. If not, please try to find them in the panel. They are listed as ASL interpreter Kate B. Make sure to pin them and have a side-to-side view on so that you are able to follow that and the presentation at the same time. This webinar is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel within a few days. We'll send out the recording along with the slide deck. We were originally going to have a scribe for meetings available, but unfortunately, due to a technical issue, it was unable to run. So if you have the slide deck from my email about an hour ago, please follow along. If you didn't receive it, we'll be sending it again when we send out the recording. With that, let us go over today's objectives. First, we're going to determine what is ARIA and where is it used. Second, we're going to look at how ARIA changes a website's or widget's interactivity. And then third, we'll learn how ARIA can actually negatively impact accessibility when it's used improperly. So what is ARIA? ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It is a set of attributes and definitions used to assign meaning and behavior to elements for interpretation by assistive technology. In simpler terms, ARIA tells assistive technology, such as screen readers, how to read something. So if you assign a role to a part of text, the screen reader is going to read that text as something else, like a button. So you can change how things are interpreted or give them additional functions. It's not a language. ARIA cannot be used on its own. It has to be used in conjunction with something like HTML or JavaScript. It doesn't change actual browser behavior or style appearances. So if assistive technology is not used, ARIA does not do anything. In addition to mimicking native elements, though, ARIA can be used to add additional functions, such as live announcements to a website. This is its main strength and the main reason we want to use it. This is typically done in conjunction with JavaScript or jQuery. Because the reason for that is usually you're going to have to switch values as users are interacting with it. So that way, when they use something and the ARIA changes, they're able to return back to the previous function. Otherwise, you might trap them. And that's where we get to the difficulties. Carl, benefits?
All right. Benefits of ARIA. What are some of its benefits? It can make non-native content accessible. HTML already contains a lot of good, capabilities to be made natively accessible, but other things, JavaScript, jQuery, PHP, those types of things may not have as much capability right in, or the library you're using may not have native accessibility built in. So ARIA can help with that. Can provide additional functionality for dynamic content, making menus, tree views, other advanced controls more accessible with screen readers. Can add missing functions to HTML contents on websites, such as make auto speaking or live regions for dynamically updating content. Can help determine the behaviors of some HTML content, dialogues, pop-ups, things of that nature. It can help make widgets and apps more accessible. Assigning the behavior of menu so that a screen reader knows that this custom control you've made is a menu or a set of tabs or things like that. Provide native keyboard functionality to some of your custom controls, such as buttons, and help to change properties such as a checkbox. Can also be used to, if you have, say, a custom edit field, you can use ARIA label to assign a custom control to that. Now, on to some of the challenges of ARIA. It will overwrite some behaviors of native content. So trying to use ARIA when you have existing HTML content, such as a button, it can cause duplicate or unexpected or non-standard behavior. ARIA is a fairly new standard, so while most modern screen readers access technology should work with it, you may have some compatibility issues, especially for newer aspects of ARIA that you need to be aware of. Misuse of roles. So, for example, if you have a piece of text that you use an ARIA role equals button on, a screen reader user is going to be expected to be able to hit enter on that and have it do something. But if you haven't coded it properly to have keyboard input for that, well, then that's going to cause confusion. Similarly, role equals grid. A screen reader is going to expect that to behave in certain ways and have certain keyboard functionality. If it doesn't, then it's going to cause problems and frustration for your users. Similarly for a menu as well. Don't overuse it. As I was alluding to earlier, if you have a button that has a label on the button and an ARIA label, you might get different or contradictory behavior. It can sometimes read out multiple things. So if you have a button that's with a natural label of submit and an ARIA label of submit, a screen reader user might hear a submit button or a submit button submit, and it can cause problems. It can also cause just the one to overwrite the other. So, if you have press enter in an ARIA label and, go to homepage, you could get press enter, go to homepage. You could get go to homepage, press enter, or you could get one or the other. And so that can be confusing to users as well. So you don't want to duplicate. And rules of thumb.
So from those benefits and challenges, here are the rules of thumb. First question you should ask yourself as you're developing is, ARIA really necessary here? As Carl mentioned, we want to use native elements when possible. They're the most reliable. HTML5 has a lot of the functionality of these roles built into it with the tag elements, just button or nav for navigation menu, that kind of thing. So we don't have to assign roles to every single thing. Screen readers and assistive technology are also more tuned to work with native elements. So that's why we want to use those. We also don't want to change native element behaviors. If you have a link, but then you give it a role equals button, the screen reader is going to interpret a button, but that might not have the same function that you intended for the link. In the case of using either enter or space to activate it, or if it's going to send you to a new window, the button typically isn't going to do that, the link will. So we don't want to change native element behaviors, especially if it's something drastic, like you take text and tell it to act as a button, because that might not always have the correct functionality, especially if you haven't scripted it to function as a button. We also don't want to double up on equivalent elements, like Carl was just ending there with button, role equals button. That can open up opportunities for the screen reader to misinterpret it or to double up. So if you press the button, but it has role equals button, it might fire twice. It might get confused and decide to not fire at all. So while that redundancy doesn't always cause problems, it's inviting more opportunity that we'd rather just leave alone. And then finally, all interactive controls have to have an accessible name and be keyboard usable. This comes up in the later half of our presentation when we start talking about widgets and apps, because in those cases, since you might not be using HTML, you're going to have to start coding all of the functionality that's needed rather than relying on what's baked into HTML when you use that. So be aware of that as you're using ARIA, you might have to start using other parts of it to make all of the elements function. Because if you only put in one thing, such as a menu item, but its parent tag doesn't have menu, it won't work. So there's a lot of rules when you start getting that deep into ARIA. That leads into the WAI ARIA authoring practices. So if we were to try and read off all of the various roles and properties and values ARIA has to all of you, we'll be here for days, if not weeks. So in general, I really recommend that you instead refer to this authoring practices guide as a reference when you're looking up various roles or what you want to use and how to use them, because it's a best practices guide developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as W3C, who are the ones who developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Version 1.0 of the authoring practices was published in 2014. 1.1 was published in 2017. It's also the most current version. 1.2 is in development and you can go look at it. I believe it is publicly available. However, they haven't published it and they haven't stated a date as when it will be officially published. So 1.1 is kind of our standard practice at the moment. This guide explains the purpose of ARIA. So what it does, the techniques and methods of how to use it correctly, and its various supporting elements, and then practices for how to manage it alongside other languages, like using JavaScript to switch values in it in order to maintain functionality and keyboard focus as you're moving through a menu. It's available from the w3.org website. If you go to the WAI and then go to standards and guidelines, ARIA is listed under there. The link is in the slide deck that went out to you all. You should have it available both before and after this presentation when we send out the second part of it. Now, core components.
All right. So ARIA has several types of core components that we'll go over. Roles. What is it? What is this thing supposed to do? It defines the behavior of an element. It will overwrite the default, whatever the screen reader thought it was. I mentioned earlier, role equals button. That is one that you might use on something to make it the screen reader treat it like it's an HTML button. You can also do heading, link, etc. for HTML. Role equals menu. Again, you need to have the underlying coding to handle the keyboard things to back this up, but you can use that to make the screen reader know it's supposed to treat whatever's contained in there as a menu. Same for something like a tab panel. Properties is another thing. What's the state or what's the information I should know? For example, has pop-up. We'll let the user know that something's going to open a dialog or a pop-up. It can change the behavior. For example, if you give it the ARIA live, then anytime that piece of content updates, it's going to read out. Another one is state. What's the current condition? So giving an invalid state on an input field will tell the user that, if they're entering an email address and it doesn't match your format validation, then you could have this invalid flag pop up and let the user know. Status expanded can let the user know, for example, if you have a collapsible set of content on your page, can let the user know when it's expanded. All right, and then on a website, can it give content accessible names, forms, labels for forms or images. you can use it to remove decorative content. Say, if you have things that that aren't relevant to the page, maybe just eye candy or otherwise not currently relevant, you can hide them. Update, you can be used to update dynamic content. Error validation. When you submit a form, if your phone number isn't in the right format, if you didn't fill out the city field, whatever, ARIA can be used to help convey some of that information and alert users when things are improperly done. And on to accessible names.
I do want to point out we have an example on screen here of some code that was for a demonstration of a ARIA live. So in that picture of code, you'll see like there's 3 different fields. They have labels. The first one is select for deciding will that ARIA live behave with polite or assertive, or is it off? The second field is whether it's going to be adding, if it's going to read as it updates, or if it's going to be just all content anytime. And then the third field is just when something is added or removed, or when things change. So that's kind of demonstrating the various types of ARIA that can be applied to a single thing, because all 3 of these will affect a single element that is the ARIA live region. So that's where we start getting into that more complex stuff. Now, moving on to accessible names and labels. This is probably the first thing people think of when they come to ARIA, other than live, because a lot of this is used for adding instructions to forms, or for adding error messages, like Carl mentioned, what have you. Accessible name is the term used in our field to explain what is an element being called that is usable by assistive technology. So things like labels or titles or these ARIA properties that we're discussing all fall under that umbrella. So for our purposes, all 3 of these are accessible names. Label, however, really only applies to the first one. So ARIA label is an attribute that is used to provide a description or a name that is not visible. So you can think of it kind of like title, where it's an attribute and then its value is what's going to be read by the screen reader. A couple things that are important to note about this. ARIA label overwrites everything else other than ARIA labeled by. So if you have like an alt attribute on there or a title attribute or that inner text, it won't be read. Typically, the ARIA label will be the thing that is read by the screen reader. Occasionally, some will read in addition to. VoiceOver on Mac OS commonly does that. JAWS and NVDA might, depending on your settings, but by default, ARIA labels first. The second thing to note that I just learned at a convention a couple of weeks ago is that it does not translate across languages. So if you're using like Google Translate to change a page or something, what is inside that ARIA label will not get translated. So the text and like a link or a button might change to Spanish if you run it through Google Translate, but the ARIA label will stay in English or whatever the default language was used to write it. So just be aware of that if you're ever dealing with multilingual websites. Example on screen is what we have: a scaled vector graphic element that has the role equals button. So it's functioning as a button. So you'll press enter and it should either cause something to open or submit a form or what have you. It has the ARIA label equals Maryland Technology Assistance Program. And then it has inner text of MDTAP or MDTAP, which is the acronym for it. In most cases, the screen reader will get to this and it will read Maryland Technology Assistance Program button. For those who are not using a screen reader and are viewing it visually, they will simply see a button, depending on how it's stylized, that says MDTAP. So it doesn't change at all the visual appearance. It just gives another name for screen readers to use. ARIA labeled by contrast, uses another element as a description for the element it's applied to. So for example, we have a paragraph element as first, and we'll say first name. And then below it will be an input field that it has ARIA labeled by label 1. It does use the unique ID. You can't use class or anything because otherwise it won't reference correctly. But in this case, when a screen reader gets to that input field, they're going to hear first name because of that connection. ARIA labeled by is the top one that's chosen. So it kind of goes ARIA labeled by, ARIA label, ARIA described by, then HTML label, HTML title, HTML placeholder. Don't use placeholder. It's not reliable because as soon as you start writing in there, it's gone and then you have no label. So always use HTML label and then ARIA. And then finally, we have ARIA described by. Functionally, it works the same way ARIA labeled by does, where it references another element to use as a description. The two differences is that it has a semantic difference for coding purposes. And the second thing is as a second functionality, a lot of the times you're going to see it used as error validation or error suggestions. So for example, our first one here is an image that has the alt text of population infographic. Then it has ARIA described by that references a following paragraph with the ID long_description. So when a screen reader finds that image, usually it will read, in this case, it will read both. It will read population infographic, and then it'll start reading the paragraph below it. This tag describes the image above. Now, the key thing is that it will likely read both. In some cases, it might only read the ARIA described by. The reason we set it up like this is that we hope that it reads the alt text, and then it'll start reading the long description, and that's when the user can shut it down if they so desire. This is not an example of good coding. It's just an example of the behavior. Please don't do this. I just want to make that clear. This is just to show how these two are going to interact. Now, the second one is we have an input for a phone number, and it has ARIA described by phone_format. And then below it, it has a paragraph saying phone number should be 10 digits long. The way this functions is, let's say a user has put in a phone number and they missed a digit, so they only put in 9. The error validation kicks in, sends it back, and then JavaScript adds this paragraph and switches that ARIA described by on so that that error message, then it gets associated with that. So a screen reader will go back to that input and hear phone number should be 10 digits long. There's a lot more to it, but that's the most common use of ARIA described by. Now, we can also use ARIA to remove decorative content, things that aren't going to be helpful to screen reader users, such as like a separator between content paragraphs, or elements that are visually hidden that should also be hidden from screen reader users to help improve the user experience. The most common way to do this is ARIA hidden equals true. ARIA hidden is a binary or a Boolean. It has to use either true or false. It's different from like the labels and such where it's using actual text. And what this does is cause a screen reader to skip that element. So anything you don't want a screen reader to be reading at any time should use ARIA hidden equals true. When they say there's a navigation menu that they want to open, they press the open button, then ARIA hidden needs to switch to false so that screen reader can actually get at the menu. Another good example to use this on is like a HR or horizontal separator in between content blocks, because that isn't a very useful element to them. And so in order to streamline their experience, we can have them just skip it. You can also use it to hide error messages or irrelevant content, or hide context-based information. So form fields that are dependent on answer, like selecting a drop down and then new fields appear. When those are visually hidden, we also need to use ARIA hidden. I do want to point out, if you're using CSS, like the property display none, that already handles this for you, so you don't have to use ARIA hidden equals true. But if you're just visually hiding it, but it's still present, then you need to use ARIA hidden because a screen reader is going to find it anyway. Another element we can use, or sorry, attribute we can use is role equals presentation. What this does is remove the interpretation of the native behavior from that content. The recommended way to use this is on a table that's just used for formatting. So if you have table, but give it the role equals presentation, a screen reader will just read it as text. It won't read it as a table. Please note, it's best practice not to use tables for formatting purposes now. HTML, CSS have so much power in how to arrange stuff, and with needing to consider both desktop and mobile design, tables are harder to make conform to those changes in screen width. So that's why it's recommended don't use tables anymore for formatting. However, if you do, please make sure to add role equals presentation to it. There is also the new property role equals none, which does the exact same thing. The presentation is older, so presentation is more likely to be interpreted correctly as you want it. And then finally, just want to point out that when you're adding role equals img or role equals image to something, or role equals presentation, determine, is that something that's supposed to be read? So in the case of something like a scaled vector graphic, which screen reader might struggle with since it's a newer element, we want to make sure that it understands this is an image, or it's something that's just decorative and we can skip it depending on what that scaled vector graphic contains. Now, Carl, if you would tell us a little bit about ARIA Live, please.
Certainly. I will just make a brief comment on role equals presentation as well. Be careful when if you're using it on something that you don't have any links or buttons or other things, headings in there, because any otherwise semantic markup or structure or anything inside the role equals presentation is going to get ignored, and it's just going to appear like text. So be careful and extra careful when using that. But indeed, on to live regions. ARIA equals live. It announces content, whenever a dynamic piece of content changes. We have a code example here of a basic ARIA live. You would need to add whatever dynamic content it's supposed to read via JavaScript. So there are two methods, assertive and polite. Polite will just read it after whatever the screen reader is speaking. Assertive will interrupt the screen reader and speak out whatever the message is. Use assertive very sparingly. It should really only be used for items of immediate importance. Hey, your form is going to time out in 30 seconds. That's probably something people would want to know. So you may need to, you might use assertive in something like that. If it's just a general notification, don't use assertive, please. We don't, imagine if your screen scrolled to a piece of content every few seconds that was updating and you had no control over that. That would get pretty annoying. That's essentially what, how a screen reader user would view assertive used when it shouldn't be. Role equals alert is another way to apply assertive live region to content. Same warnings apply. Again, only use it for error messages or time sensitive. Please don't put stuff that updates every couple of seconds or every second. Good example of this is a timer. Don't put the whole timer into a live region. If you want to have, say, if it's a 30-minute timer for a form and you want to have announcements every 5 minutes using a role equals polite, you have 25 minutes left. You have 20 minutes left. Great. Do not put so that you hear 29:59, 29:58, 29:57, and then every time you do something, your screen reader will read out whatever it's doing, but then it will just start counting down the timer. that gets very distracting and annoying very quickly and may result in people leaving your site. And whatever you do, do not ever use assertive or role equals alert on something that updates that quickly, like a timer, because that will make your page unusable. In general, from my personal experience, as I am blind and a screen reader user, anything less than about 15 to 30 seconds of updates can be a little frustrating or confusing, because it's like, why is it reading these things? Question, does the person need to know about this? For example, a gray area I've seen with live regions is on, say, product advertisement carousels that might refresh every 15 or 20 seconds. Frankly, a lot of that's a gray area where you may get differing opinions. Some blind people will find that annoying if there's an ARIA live on that. Some may like that, but just be cognizant of when you're using lives and on what. Onto error validation, another good use of ARIA. ARIA required will let users know when they're tabbing through a field if that field, or moving through a field if that field is required. It works the same as the HTML attribute required. ARIA invalid alerts when something is not properly formatted, for example, telephone number, email address. It will not describe the error. You need to use ARIA describe by or some other method for that. Don't use invalid on every input or when the field gains focus. You really want to only use the ARIA invalid after error validation has been completed or when the field leaves focus. So for example, if you tab away from a phone number field you haven't properly formatted for a phone number, that might be a good time to trigger it and say, hey, this is not the right format. Or when someone types back into the field with an invalid phone number, then you could trigger it. But otherwise, don't trigger it on every input or when the field initially gains focus. On to ARIA with widgets.
Okay, so now with websites, ARIA can be fairly simple. It just adds some additional functionality or replaces functionality of things. When we get into widgets and applications, that's when we start getting into the really hardcore stuff. The image on screen is the role data model from W3C's ARIA authoring practices. And if you can see, it starts off with here are the roles, but then starts breaking out into what follows that, and then what is it dependent on. So you have a tree of, we have a role with a menu, but then underneath that, there's the elements below it that have to be there for it to function, menu item. And that's where we start getting into, we have to code every single part of the functionality because it's not implicitly defined now. We have to define it ourselves. So you'll see this in menus, accordions, or tab panels. If some of the widgets on a website might have custom controls or elements. If you're working in something like Google Docs and it has its own shortcuts, that's what those custom controls are. They're communicated to screen readers by ARIA. And then you have role equals application, where the entire thing is treated as a piece of software, such as Google Docs. It's a really good example for this kind of thing. So with menus, we have two kinds, menu bar and menu. And both of these are roles. The bar is horizontal and the menu is vertical. And the only other difference is that a bar is persistent. So you think of it as that nav bar on like a mobile website it's always there even as you're scrolling. Whereas the role equals menu usually requires an open close button and it won't always be there. Those are the two main differences. Beyond that, their functionality is the same. The key thing with it is that the individual elements that are its children. So if you have a div with that role menu bar or menu, and then you put links underneath it, those links have to be marked as menu items so that they're treated as part of the menu. Otherwise, they're going to be treated as separate elements. They might not read in the correct order, or their functionality might be broken. This does, and the reason we do this is that it sets the expectation of using the arrow keys to navigate instead of tab. So with a lot of drop-down screen readers, when they open it, they can use the arrow keys to scroll through the options rather than tapping through all the links again. So it enables that behavior that we want. And then it sets that expectation that screen reader users are expecting their normal behaviors of, okay, I'm in a menu, I need to switch to using my arrow keys. It is important also that you need to maintain the focus via scripting. And this is again where we have to code every single way we interact with it, because unlike in HTML, where we can just move through links and such, we have to make sure that we're switching the ARIA hidden and tab index values as focus moves from item to item. So the first option that appears that should be selected should have ARIA hidden equals false and tab index equals 0. So that screen reader can move to it. All of the other menu items need to have ARIA hidden equals true and tab index equals -1, so that they're ignored initially. And then when the user moves to the next element, those will switch. That way we can keep a focus indicator on it so the user knows where they are. And we can also make sure that a screen reader is interpreting correctly and not trying to read all of these elements together as a single group. All right, accordions and tab panels.
Certainly. Accordions and tab panels can be used with ARIA to make them work well with screen readers. One of the first ones, ARIA expanded, can be used to announce whether a section of, say, an accordion is open or closed. These can be used, for example, on a frequently asked questions site. You have an option for each question that can be expanded or collapsed. You'd use this here to let the person know whether or not the section is expanded. Tab list and tab, these can be used to make tab panels, for example, for different settings pages or different types of content that you might move through on a site. You'd use the selected role to announce the selected tab, which one is currently in focus. ARIA, the position inset, lets you specify where something should appear. Places it in the correct sequence. And then ARIA controls lets you set up the relationships of the related content. Then we have at the bottom of the slide an example, a code example of doing an ARIA tab panel with ARIA. This is from the Mozilla developers. Custom controls. Role equals region or group. These can produce what are called landmarks by some screen readers or regions by others. These are additional structural elements to navigate a web page. These can be things like main, sidebar, content info, header, footer. These are different from headings and complementary to them. They should really be used to help mark out the major regions of a page, whereas headings are used to, say, provide structure within a given block of text. So you'd have one main region and then, say, all your blog articles inside that main region with different headings to separate the articles. Role description overrides the express name of a role. It should be things inside a region or widget. Again, use sparingly. Button states, if you have a button that toggles a setting on and off, instead of using a checkbox, you can use pressed. Pressed to indicate whether it's true or false, or checkbox properties, things like that. ARIA key shortcuts is another one. If you're developing a custom web application or other fancy, web application, you really want to use keyboard shortcuts to enable screen reader users to navigate through this better. It will provide a lot of efficiency to keyboard users, not just those using screen readers, but anyone who's using a keyboard to navigate if there are keyboard shortcuts implemented. Be careful not to conflict with existing keyboard shortcuts. Control plus P to print. Don't add Control plus P for something on your site, or Control S to save, things like that. The operating system is going to win, and that shortcut key isn't really going to do much. So be careful when doing those. Lastly, we want to talk about role equals application. This is a very special role that can cause major problems if used improperly. It's used for web applications, complex pages that have their own keyboard handling, their own way of doing things, and they don't want the screen readers attempt to use a virtual cursor or other things to get in their way and potentially cause problems. Really only use this if you are 100% sure you know what you're doing, if you have things in place for to be handled by the screen reader, things like that. It disables, the screen reader's commands for moving by heading, button, form control. If you're a screen reader user or familiar with screen readers, it essentially puts it into, to use a JAWS term, it puts it into forms mode. And you want to be careful. And it should really never be used on standard websites to handle portions of a site, because it's going to cause problems if it's not done well. Again, cannot stress enough, use sparingly, and when you know exactly what you're doing and are fully prepared to handle everything, because the screen reader's just going to take a back seat, just going to speak whatever comes to it, but otherwise it's going to get out of your way, and hope that you have it all under control. So that pretty much concludes. Stephen, do we want to cover anything before I move on to the last couple of slides? Or
The only thing I would say is, since a lot of what we just talked about is kind of the more complex stuff with ARIA, the reason we bring it up is because both Carl and I do testing, and we see a lot of websites that are quite good, accessible, quite accessible, but then they have a widget, or that they open their registration form for a service inside a application, so like a program essentially inside your browser. And that's when we start seeing things completely break, because now they're trying to manage everything with JavaScript, and they're having to, instead of using the native HTML and such, they're having to use all these parts of ARIA, and it can get very challenging and harder to make it fully functional, because you have to define every single behavior. It's not like HTML where it's part of the language. So that's why we bring this up, and we want to make you guys aware that if you're going to dive into this, do your research. The authoring guides practices is really good. It's pretty much going to be your starting place. I will say the Mozilla developers examples that were used earlier are good for reference. They're a little bit easier to digest, in my opinion. But just wanted to make you all aware that if you're working on a website, you're probably going to use fairly simple things with ARIA that are just using either direct true or false, or you're going to be using text inside them to label something. When you start wanting to get into like the widgets and applications, have that guide up in a second tab, because you're going to need it. Go ahead, Carl.
all right, so I'll just highlight our next event that we will be, again, the NFB and Maryland Department of Disabilities will be partnering with, is on December 14th, a couple weeks from now, we'll be doing a bit of an accessible devices event. We're going to cover, if you're looking for gift ideas or just new products, things that are out there, we're going to be covering some smart home and, the latest with the voice assistants and other smart home gadgets. We're going to be doing a section on gaming, and we're going to be covering some various blindness tech, the NFB independence market, MDTAP, and a couple other cool, fun new things where they're looking for just new products that you might like or some gift ideas. You can register at nfb.org/CENA and just click on the trainings link. That's December 14th. That's going to be a half-day event from 1 to 5 in the afternoon. So hopefully we can see some of you at that time.
All right. So to wrap up, we have our contact information. It's in the slide deck. If you didn't get that, you can email myself at mdod.nva@maryland.gov. You can also visit our website for information on ARIA and other areas of accessibility at mdod.maryland.gov. If you would like to contact Carl at the National Federation of the Blind, you can email access@nfb.org, or you can go to their website, as Carl mentioned, nfb.org/CENA. There are some additional resources available in the slide deck. There's WebAIM's article on ARIA, again, kind of giving a good explanation of what ARIA is, how it functions, and will lead you to other resources on how to implement it yourself. I know we talk a lot about don't use ARIA, but there's a lot of functionality that is necessary for ARIA, such as ARIA Live and the dynamic updates. And regarding that, DQ has a simplified version. It's called like a playground configuration tool. It gives a decent example of how ARIA Live functions and the code that goes behind it. It's more useful for just learning how ARIA Live behaves. You can try and use it to code and implement your own, but just be aware that it's somewhat simplified. So when you start adding it into your website, it's going to probably take a different form. Now that I'm thinking about it, because I gotten this question at a previous presentation, is there like a guideline regarding ARIA Live and the frequency of updates? There isn't a set one to my knowledge, but my general rule of thumb that I tell people is if I, as a developer, like when I test it, and I'm getting annoyed at it, chances are that the user out in the general public is going to be annoyed at it. So keep that in mind. Think about your own tolerance level. Would you be annoyed by this? And then how can you make this more user friendly, and how important it is for a user to be up to date on that. With that, we have time for questions. I know we had one question in the Q&A that I answered in text earlier, but I'm going to address it again. Would you say the order once more that starts with ARIA labeled by? So it starts with ARIA labeled by. If that's not there, it will read the ARIA label. If neither of those are there, it goes to the HTML label. Then it will read the HTML title attribute. Title attribute usually runs in addition to other things. And then if there's nothing there, it will read the placeholder attribute if it's something like an input field. As I mentioned, placeholder gets wiped when you start entering data into that field. So don't rely on it for labeling because it disappears. ARIA described by usually reads in addition to other labels. There's a caveat there, but in occasions where it does override, either because the screen reader chooses to use it that way or something has changed in the operating system, then it's going to read after ARIA label. So that's your kind of hierarchy of how those get used. For other elements, again, ARIA will almost always override the existing thing. So just when you tell a link to behave as a button, be aware of that because it does change the way a user is going to interpret it. With that, if there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in Q&A or put them in chat. We can hang around for a few minutes.
I do have one more comment I'd like to make.
Sure, go ahead, Carl.
ARIA can be very useful. Generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're thinking you need ARIA, ask yourself, is there an HTML element or HTML control or whatever that can do what I need natively? If yes, try to use that first. ARIA is for when HTML and other native accessibility falls short. That's, if you kind of go by that, you'll generally be okay. One of the frequent ways I've seen that developers kind of get in trouble with ARIA is if they try to throw ARIA label on everything, give everything an ARIA role, even if it's just a standard HTML link, things like that. The overuse of ARIA can sink a website faster and potentially make it even less accessible than if ARIA wasn't used in the first place. So do your research, make sure you know what you're doing. When it's used properly, it's great. It has a ton of features, makes complex web applications like Google Docs, other web controls, menus, things like that, that are not really possible in HTML. It makes those work beautifully with screen readers, but you got to make sure you're using it correctly and only when it's needed.
Good timing for that, Carl, because we just got another question. Thanks. When is the best time to use ARIA then?
Yeah. So I get to simplify, the best time to use ARIA is when there isn't another control in HTML or whatever programming language you're using's native accessibility capabilities that won't do the job.
Yeah, adding additional functionality like that ARIA live announcing of constantly updating content, that's really when it's best used, or when you just don't have the element you need, like in a widget, like the tab panels. That's a rather common use. We have a hand raised. Okay, I'm going to allow you to talk. Should be able to unmute and talk if you would like, or you can type your question in chat if you would prefer. I hope that worked.
If you're using a keyboard, it's Alt-A to unmute.
Ah, you got the answer. Okay, great. All right. Are there any other questions? Give it another minute. All right, it does not appear so. So with that, I think we are good for today. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to our captioner and ASL interpreter today. As I mentioned at the start, this was recorded. Once the recording is done processing and get uploaded, it will be available either Thursday or Friday this week, along with the slide deck. And if you have any other questions at any time, please reach out to Carl or myself, and we will be happy to assist you. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you very much for coming.